there we go. Welcome everybody to another episode of the Puget Systems podcast. Today we're joined by Kelly Shipman and Jon Allman. Kelly's our 3D virtual production, kind of just all-around 3D guy, and Jon is our kind of AI machine learning expert. And today we're going to be talking about Siggraph. We just got back from Siggraph a few days ago, and so we're going to be just covering. Kelly and Jon, you guys both were there as more attendees. Whereas like I myself was running the booth, and so it's always nice to kind of get a perspective of from that side of things, because I myself don't often get to see the sessions and the talks and things like that. So as usual with these sorts of shows, it's very personally interesting and exciting for me. So but I kind of jumped ahead a little, but I always do like to have the guests do a little intro of who you are and what you do. Just in case anybody doesn't already know. So we'll go ahead and start with Kelly.
So I'm Kelly. I'm as you said, the 3D virtual production game dev expert and or industry analyst at Puget. Cover everything 3D graphic related. So Siggraph is kind of one of the big events for me every year, because it's everything that's like future looking, all the new tools, all the new technologies, anything like that could be coming up in the industry happens at Siggraph. So for me, this is like the big one to be at.
And Jon?
Hey, I'm Jon A. I am the AI and machine learning industry analyst at Puget, and that puts my focus on things like LLMs and diffusion models, image generation, text generation, text classification, all of those kinds of things. And this was my very first Siggraph, so it was definitely an interesting trip for me, and it was fun going back to Denver. I haven't been in Denver in a while, so it was good to be back. Cool,
right on. Yeah. So I guess we'll just kind of start at the beginning. Kelly, you kind of touched on it right there, that this show's really primarily focused for your area of expertise. Mm-hmm. But as we've noticed in a lot of conventions this year, AI is like the thing. It was just like a couple years ago, it was crypto is everywhere. Now it's AI everywhere. So how does that affect your side of things?
Well, yeah, that's so all the talk for the last, I don't know how long, LLMs have been like the big hot topic for a while. We hear a lot in the industry from high ups, the Jonsons, the Zuckerbergs, the whoever, Altman, all them, about how AI is going to change everything and how you can use it to do everything. You can replace all these artists, and you just type in a few words and you have this 3D world and all this stuff. So Siggraph kind of focuses on how does that actually work? How does these LLMs, how they fit in workflows? What can they do? What can't they do? So there was a lot of talks of both on what tools are available, what does work, what doesn't work, and then also like big talks on the ethics, on all the shortcomings, all the getting kind of past all the hype of stuff. And like I feel like there's a lot of like also calming people's fears in the industry of like everyone thinks that this AI is coming to take their jobs, but right. Then when you kind of get down into the actual trenches, it's not as like amazing, life-changing as people think, but it's still useful. It's just, how is it going to be useful? Yeah. So that was the big thing. Like the past several years, AI wasn't really a conversation. I think last year's Siggraph was showing off at our booth. We were showing off Quarter Digital's the face swap, I think, or maybe it was
I think it was the anime, the rock paper scissors anime.
Yeah. That still continues to be like the one use case. Well, not the anime necessarily, but like the face swap is like the one main thing that is used in the industry, is a big deal, has established workflows around it now,
Okay.
because that's been out for a while now. I mean,
Sure.
Corridor's first face swap video was the Keanu Reeves one. That was like 2 years ago now, something like that. And that has kind of made its way into standardized workflows, just because it does help in that is a task that a lot of high-end movies use, where they have a stunt performer or whatever, maybe a 3D animated thing, and they need to get the actor's face onto it to look right.
Sure.
So, but that's, to me, that's technically machine learning, not AI,
Right.
not generative AI, because it's not like you're typing into some language model, replace this character's face with this face, and it just does it. Like, you have to feed in all this data of the face you want to use and train it, and then it will do it. And so that's a technicality, I guess, but like it's the correct term. It's machine learning, not AI.
Sure.
Um,
I'm curious, John, about your perspective on some of that too. A lot of the talk around this is like Kelly mentioned, oh, it's taking jobs. There's the ethics questions, and I think a lot of times it's being presented as something more than it really is. And so, since you're kind of really into the nitty gritty, like you get into like the programming of it, the real understanding of how these things work. From your perspective of what you saw at Siggraph and things, how is this going, I guess?
Yeah. Well, I think Kelly brought up a good point with kind of the higher ups, the big names in the business. Really, I don't know of a better way of putting it, but putting out a lot of hype for it, because it. I do think it is something that's. I think it's important and definitely transformative, but maybe not quite in the same way as it's being presented, or maybe not at the same speed as it is presented either, because it does seem like that when you talk to like the sort of boots on the ground folks that are actually working with it, they are generally a lot more reserved about it, and more realistic, it seems, about the limitations of what these tools can do, and not quite so bombastic about replacing everybody with AI. And in particular, one of the big themes that I was encountering across a number of talks from different presenters was the idea that these tools really should be thought of as tools rather than like replacements for people. And it's not about automating away jobs, but it's more about enhancing the people that you can already do, and improving the quality or the speed at which people can do the work that they're already doing.
Yeah, Autodesk had a good session about that, about their initiatives into AI, especially generative AI, because they've implemented AI into a lot of other workflows that they deal with, primarily like asset management and scheduling and that kind of stuff that Autodesk is involved with, like the scheduling the pipeline of everything. But for actually creating assets, they've been a little slow from their own admission, because they are trying to approach it from the artist's point of view. Like, how will artists actually use this tool? How does it actually help them? How does it benefit them? Not how can we do their job? Because it doesn't translate to the same as a person that made it. Like, it doesn't have that same look. It doesn't have the same like emotional feel when you create art from a person versus this AI stuff. You can get a really good looking thing, but not. And then also in a film production, game production, that kind of stuff, if you start generating assets with AI, it's very difficult to get them to all unify and look, because you're basically rolling the dice every time you generate something. And if you have something you've generated and you need to make a small change to it, it's hard to get just that small change done without generating the entire thing. And then now you've lost the original, and you just end up spending more time trying to do all this stuff than like you could have just done it. So yeah, Autodesk is taking that approach of like, okay, let's work with artists, see how this can fit in their tools, how it can just speed up something that they currently do, how can it take away the tedium of something they do. Like there's different ways that it can be implemented other than just push a button, generate a 3D world, you know.
Sure. I saw some of that with the demo we were showing off. It was a stream diffusion, and it was really funny to see how it was, because like you said, it's rolling the dice like every frame, and the inconsistency from like it was real, just from one frame to the next. It's just it's weird, and it reinterprets everything every single time, and yeah, it seems like you still need that human touch in order to get a consistent feel and look through the thing. Like Toys R Us, I think they recently put out an entire commercial that was supposed to have been done with generative AI, but I'm curious to know how much of that had to be cleaned up and really fussed with by people, like how much of a real human team was involved in that. I can't imagine it was all machined.
They did have a behind the scenes, but it didn't go too deep into some of that.
I'll have to look at that.
They did have to basically train it for what they wanted it to do.
Yeah.
They didn't really go into it, but I assume they used RAGs or something to, which is retrieval augmented generation. Is that correct, John?
Yeah.
Where they create something that then the AI pulls that specific data from, in addition to the large language model, to then generate something to help kind of keep it samesies throughout the whole thing. But yeah, I was curious. I'd like to know a little bit more about that commercial too. It was interesting.
Yeah, maybe something like control nets were used in it. It's been a while since I've seen it. I should go back and review it. But that brings up an interesting point, because it was actually, I wish I could remember the gentleman's name, but a fellow from Weta FX. He was talking about some of the models that they use, and it sounds like that they will generate models that are only used for a particular show, and that they don't reuse them on following shows, and that they're not really looking to make generalized models, which are kind of what we see as a goal for a lot of things, like the llama models that Meta puts out, and there's plenty of other examples. And it also, he mentioned that there are reasons for you to want to overfit your model to your data, which is typically seen as a bad thing, because basically it's trying to, the model's trying to fit the curve to the data too closely, and it kind of generally it'll give you the same outputs over and over again, rather than a little bit of the variety. But that could be exactly what you want if you've got a very particular style that you're shooting for. Then maybe having an overfitted model versus a generalized one is exactly what you need, especially if you're going to toss it out the door once you're finished with that particular shoot.
That would make sense for the Toys R Us commercial, because if you have something like a mascot like Jeffrey the Giraffe, it needs to look a very specific way,
right?
But there are infinite number of ways to generate a giraffe. So when you're dealing with something like brand IP and all that kind of stuff, it needs to be very specific. So if you could train a model just to only draw a giraffe one way, then you can like control how your brand is being presented. And that would be the same for movie, TV shows, or whatever. You can have the specific look. You have Gollum from Lord of the Rings. He needs to look a certain way. You can't have him change scene to scene.
Yeah, Was there anything in particular session or that stood out as interesting or future forward?
One that I really liked was a multi-day session put on by NVIDIA about virtual humans, and the opportunities was virtual humans, opportunities and challenges of Gen AI. So this is somewhat graphical in the fact that there is a 3D human that will be talking to you, or could be used in numerous different ways, but it's an interactive human. And this could be used for like customer service, like a chat bot, or thrown into a game that would like, this would be the NPC that we would be able to talk to. Like, this is the foundational work of all those different kinds of things. Or even into a movie where like you just feed it some dialogue and it will act it out or whatever. So yeah, that was the genesis of this. The kind of nutshell summary of that multi-day course is this doesn't work yet. But it was mainly like, these are the different challenges, these are the specific instances of why it's difficult right now, and what needs to be overcome, what do we need to work on to get to that point. So it was very informative from that space. And one of the things that I liked about one point they talked about was, you have this 3D human that, say it's a chatbot, and I ask it a question, and then there is inevitably a delay in a response. And in a human to human interaction, that's a very awkward pause. That they need to overcome, because what's happening is so I speak something, the system needs to then convert that text or voice into text, send that text through an LLM, which may be online, so that might have latency there. The text response is generated. That then goes to a text-to-speech program. That speech is then sent to an audio-to-animation program, which is then sent to the renderer, be it like Unreal Engine or Unity or whatever, to then display the response with all the audio. So, and that's still like, that's a lot to happen. And it happens within a couple of seconds, but it's still a very big pause. It makes the conversations feel unnatural. So then also during all of that, they need to work on the context cues of what's the face doing during that pause? How's the face emoting during all that? Because if you're trying to convey bad news and it's smiling weirdly, or doing all this stuff, that like, that's part of the communication human to human. And so when you have a virtual human, it needs to also have context of how it moves, how it eyebrows are shifting and stuff. So yeah, there's just a lot that needs to happen on whatever system or systems to make it become natural.
Sure.
Trying to see what else. Yeah, they talked about using prompt engineering to create a backstory and personality for the AI assistant. So like, it needs to, the system will then force information into the LLM that is not part of your prompt, but it's like an additional prompt engineering to then make it generate the right personality, the right, all that kind of stuff for that conversation. So yeah, it was real fascinating. And then there's just like, I think I have 2 pages of notes on just the challenges facing doing this. Like the dev time, cloud versus local, scalability. If you're trying to do all that for 100,000 people, like, that's a lot of resources. Hallucinations are become even worse. Not like they're worse, like the hallucinations are worse, but like the impact of those hallucinations become worse because now you have a human looking thing telling you this information. It seems more believable, but if it's false, then it's bad. Which leads to overconfidence in the output. Like we tend to trust that face. And so we're like, oh yeah, this person told me this, but it wasn't true. Nonverbal behavior, multilingual support, and then like
that's gonna
talking
be hard.
about not just the language, but also the I was talking about the behaviors, the expressions you make, any hand gestures, all that kind of stuff. That differs from culture to culture.
Yeah.
And if you present the wrong response for that culture, then that you just change what the response is. And yeah, it just dives into this. When you hear the CEOs talk, it sounds like, oh yeah, this is what's going to happen in the immediate future. Then you hear the people making the stuff actually work. They're like, this is several years down the road.
Right.
So it's very fascinating.
Yeah, it's interesting that you brought up the latency thing, because that was something that I heard in another talk about how rendering farms, like the existing rendering farms that these organizations are using, may or may not be great at machine learning, because of typically not worrying about latency with those, because they get the data that they need and then they sit and process on it, and for a while, and then that's not a big deal. But purpose built machine learning setups they're going to be focused on reducing that latency as much as possible, and they'll also, in addition to that, probably be good at rendering as well. So it kind of goes in one direction, depending on the layout of the farm.
I was muted for a sec. I want to grab. This is a big question, and I'm hoping maybe John will have, or you, Kelly, have better understanding of some of these words. Taval from YouTube asks, are any folks working with finite element analysis and morphology seeking combined with AI generative form iterations that are tied to real world material science property?
Oh, wow.
Not sure
That
what
sounds
that
like
means.
a Don question.
Oops, clicked the wrong thing.
Yeah, I feel like that's above me. I don't know what most of that stuff means.
I appreciate the question though, and I will I'll send this back up to the team as well, because while I don't know what a lot of those words mean, I want to try and get these questions answered as best as possible. So if not, I don't think we'll be able to touch on that right now, but I would say follow us on like Twitter and stuff, and I'll try and get you an answer to that. Because I'm curious too, because I don't know. So
Yeah, well,
I feel like
I
Ron
will
would
say
have an
that
answer.
it does remind me though of one of the more interesting talks that I caught at the end of the show, and it was from a meteorologist talking about using AI for weather prediction, and it linked into how these like the newer video models that are coming out are seemingly turning into pretty good simulators of physics, because you put in a lot of video of bodies moving through space, water reacting, fluid dynamics, and that kind of thing. And in any real world video that we put into a model, obviously the laws of physics aren't being broken in that video, so it's following a certain set of parameters and rules, and the end output is something that seems to understand physics pretty well, and as a result of that, it's what this gentleman was talking about was exploring that kind of use case for predicting weather patterns, and
Cool.
using those video techniques, and instead of like your parameters being your RGB channels, you've got your temperature and your pressure and all the other myriad of variables that go into the weather. And also they mentioned using like our existing I guess if you can think of like the world broken up into like 25-kilometer grids, and that's kind of the resolution that we've got, but using like our super resolution techniques to take that data, like say 25 kilometers squared, and upraising it to like 5 kilometers squared, and then suddenly we've got a much better resolution um,
Mm.
of the weather in a given area. And obviously it's like it at least to me it sounds very cool, but and it could be potentially very valuable, but obviously there's also a bunch of caveats to that, and there's it's certainly not perfect right now, and it's exactly why people are talking about it and working on it. But it's another very very cool application that I came across.
Yeah, that sounds cool.
I can imagine weather would be a great place for this type of AI because it's all pattern recognition at this point, and that's exactly what weather needs is like look at the patterns that are happening and what's coming next. And
Yeah, and it was also interesting thinking of it from a compute perspective as well, because um, I think that a lot of us, certainly I do, think of AI as taking this, huge amounts of compute in order to make it happen, which is certainly the case, especially when we're talking about building like these large foundational models, like Meta and OpenAI are doing with clusters with thousands of nodes and all of that. But in this case, like this weather prediction, it's actually a shortcut to getting that high resolution data, if assuming we can figure out all the issues with it, because performing a true physics simulation at that resolution would take way more compute than it would be to simulate it with AI instead.
Hmm.
So it's actually less compute to do it that way than the traditional simulation way. So
Oh, that's interesting.
that wasn't something that I had really considered until that talk.
That's pretty cool. Yeah, it still kind of blows my mind that even with the image generation stuff, it's still kind of based on this large language model concept, which is kind of difficult for me to wrap my head around because to me that's still very much like text, and um, I'm not sure where the question is here, but I guess it's just strange to me that it seems like it feels to me, I guess, from the layman side of things that it's a square peg in a round hole. Um, but I suppose maybe that's just a misunderstanding of the the whole concept of it.
Well,
Um,
I think in the simplest terms, it's like um, we've got to. It's kind of like a programming language in a sense. You can't just. I mean, things are different now with coding LLMs, where you can just type in a natural language and get out a program on the other side. But you have to be able to speak in a way that the machine can understand you, right?
okay.
So you put in your text prompt, and that gets converted into um, numbers, essentially embeddings that then that um, up, kind of connect you to a um, I guess what's the word I'm trying to think of? Like I guess like a theme that the system can understand. It's been trained to associate these numbers with these numbers, with that. That's where you get your um, vector. I'm sure you hear a lot about vectors, but um, and it's basically that's the conversion to turn it from English into something that the computer can understand and then output on the other end. And that was actually something that that reminds me of a talk that I encountered where somebody mentioned that that text only prompting is really limited, actually, um, and that we're going to have to move beyond that, and because there are just certain things that language really wasn't meant to convey. Like if we're trying to describe somebody's pose precisely, like there's certain, like we have certain words, standing, sitting, crouching, but what about like crouching with your one arm up and one arm down? And like how much detail do you need to put into your
Ooh.
text, and is it really going to understand it? And that's where um, multimodal models are going to be much more powerful, where they can accept both text and image and whatever other inputs that you can give them. Because as the saying goes, a picture contains 1,000 words, right? So
Sure.
if you can just give it a picture of this is what I'm looking for, but also maybe some text as well to give it this, then presumably you're going to have much closer output to what you're looking for.
Huh. Yeah, that's. I guess that it changes the concept of what the language part in large language model. It's not just the text or it's not English as a language. It's the way to communicate, not just to the model, but also how the model communicates back.
Mhm.
I guess.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Man, it's wow. I mean, that leads to weird. I mean, for me, it leads to weird, interesting kind of thoughts. Like you're saying, like we're going to have to figure out a different way of actually communicating with the models. Not just. I feel like it's not just pictures and text and even audio, but maybe even a whole different sort of programming or machine language to
Mhm.
for the nuance of things. It
Yeah,
makes
there
me think
was
of like
a
R2D2's beeping, beep, boop, beep, 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 right? And then, but everybody in Star Wars just kind of knows what they're saying, which is weird.
right.
But
There was a Shutterstock was showing off their 3D model generator, and it's multimodal. So you could either just like say, make me a sword that's has all this stuff or whatever, and it would do it. Or you can put in a picture. They showed a demo of taking some concept art of the shield and saying, make a shield. On the back it has, you know, a handle with this kind of brace or whatever, and it would take that picture and basically convert that into a 3D thing and then fill in all the other pieces that were missing based off of the text prompts, because it would know that, like, okay, you're making a shield and it needs to be this shape from this picture, and put everything together, and it looked pretty good. And it's the way of like giving the model as much information as you can in whichever way you can to get the result that you're looking for.
right on. Earlier, we had mentioned about the ethics. I recently saw that video game voice actors either are or might be going
Mhm.
on strike over AI
Believe,
replicated
yeah.
voices. And I guess it's kind of a two-part question. One, was that at all brought up during Siggraph? Did you guys notice, or the ethics side of things, and like how do they handle that? And then also, I guess the other part of that question is, how do you think we can handle that? Like we're already seeing some kind of um, unethical uses of this sort of things
Mhm.
in a variety of different fashions.
Yeah, it was definitely brought up quite often. There was sessions solely about ethics, but I didn't attend those ones. There's too many sessions to attend.
Yeah.
Um, but in most every session I went to, which was already about AI, um, it was at least brought up that like we need to see how we can solve this, how we can use this in an ethical way. Um, and the ethics of it, of how the models work and how they're used, kind of goes hand in hand with um, the IP security for the people using it,
Hmm.
because there's two sides to it. There's where the data's coming from, Like, is that your data or not?
Mhm.
And then how is that data being used? So studios don't want to use data that's not theirs because that can put them into risk of potential lawsuits.
Sure.
Because, I mean, it's very much unknown case law at this point. Like, it's butting up against all of these previous things that we don't really know how it's going to play out in the future. So everyone's just like, I don't want to use it if I can get in trouble, or it's even a potential. Because like
Sure.
if Disney used it in the next Marvel movie, and then someone was to like, hey, you infringed on my IP on the next Avengers movie, they're out billions of dollars. Like, it's not a good thing. Then on the how it's used side, there's a lot of concern with the voice actors. They're like, okay, I'm contracted to do this specific work. My voice is my tool. My voice is what I bring to the table. So you can use it for these lines that you have paid me to record. But then the studios are like, well, we have all this data now. This is our data. Can we then just train our own models to then sound like this character? And from the studio's standpoint, they're like, well, this is our character, so therefore we can use this. The voice actor's like, no, you paid me for this work, and now you're using my work for this other work, and I'm not being compensated for this new work. So yeah, I'm pretty sure that the voice actors did go on strike.
I think it was yeah.
Yeah, it's a really big deal for the voice actors. The same thing happened with the Writers Guild, I believe. It was the same thing. It's like you
Like
paid me to
digital
write this
actors.
thing, and now you can then use the work I did, make new things without paying me for the work that you had me do. Yeah, it's a very difficult. Some of it's just going to be how the contracts are now written. Like, does it include hey, I'm going to do voice. Basically, I'm going to do all the voice to train the model, and I'll be paid for that. And then maybe I'll get residuals on whenever you use this model. Or like, there's different ways around it. It's just no one's really offering to pay for training the model and using it in perpetuity. But that's what would happen normally. Is like, I want to keep using your voice, so I'm going to keep paying you to come in and stuff.
Man, that's weird.
Yeah, I definitely saw a lot of that too. The ethics of it certainly came up, and when it in talks where it didn't come up, I think that a lot of the questions from audience members were related to the ethics, and I generally got the feeling that that presenters, I don't want to call it paying lip service to the ethics, 'cause that's a little bit too harsh, I think. But it was certainly brought up that like it's like, this is an important issue. We want to do the right thing, and we're going to try to do the right thing. And then somebody asks, "How are you going to do the right thing?" And they say, "We don't know."
Yeah.
Kind of. So it was very vague on that. But I did. I liked one of the analogies that somebody made, um, and they compared it to like sampling, like in music, taking samples from other artists, incorporating it in your song. And I think there is, a, I think that is a pretty good comparison and can give us some guidelines on how to approach these topics. It's obviously not quite the same when you can take enough samples of somebody's work and then just in a sense click a button and output more content that sounds incredibly like them, especially in in terms of like the voice actors. Like we're either there or pretty darn close to just being able to imitate somebody's voice, essentially perfectly. Certainly well enough to fool the average person, I think.
Oh, for sure.
And so it isn't, quite the same, but I think that there are some lessons to be learned from that. And I like how you mentioned, Kelly, that there's kind of two different aspects of it. One is the training part of the models, and the data that goes into them, versus also how they're being used as well. Because I think that there are ethical and unethical ways of training models, and ethical and unethical ways of using them. And you can have an ethically created model used in an unethically way, and vice versa. So it's it is a matter of looking at both sides of the coin. And there's also some concerns as well that the first folks in have an incentive to keep others out. So like there are questions about copyright related to like how OpenAI or Meta have been training their LLMs, taking in books that they don't have the rights to, and using that information to as a text corpus for their models. Well, they've already done it. So now if there's legislation that comes up that says you can't do that anymore, they might be all for it, to keep smaller folks from getting in on that same getting those same benefits from that data. So at this point, locking it down, may have some unintended side effects for smaller players that would like to get into this business and maybe have some great value to add to this space. So it's there's certainly no easy answers, and I can't really blame the presenters for not having answers, because it's incredibly sticky, especially when you get into legal considerations. It's just there's so many things to think about.
Right.
Yeah.
And some of those presenters are like, they're the scientists making the work. And like the legal side is kind of not their forte. And so they're like, well, the research needs to keep moving while the legal people figure out the legality of it. Like, and just, I guess they hope that someone doesn't get trampled in the process.
I mean, it's very much like splitting the atom. The science guys, I mean, they saw what could be done and they went and did it, and then it reminds me of the Malcolm quote. Ian Malcolm, you're so concerned with whether or not you could, you didn't stop to think whether or not you should, and like it's been said before, the genie's out of the bottle, and legislation and law and ethics and all that stuff usually often come second, whether with a lot of scientific advancements, in a variety of different fields. And for me personally, I think the net benefit is a net benefit, I should say, despite some of the legalities of it. And just to kind of swing back a little bit, it kind of brings up thoughts of impersonation too, right? Like you have professional impersonators. They're like the Tom Cruise thing, right? That guy, like, it probably gets mistaken as Tom Cruise all the time. And it comes down to just like a personal morality of whether or not you abuse that. And I think that's kind of where we're at right now, is like on an individual or case-by-case basis, we have to kind of just consider our own morality and ethics and in how we use these tools.
Yeah.
At least for now. It's going to be weird. It's evolved. It commented a similar sort of thing. Business models cannot support the right thing, as it always gets warped by special interests. Ethics is kind of a joke when inserted into a weighted playing field of business and politics. Just some of this stuff just moves too fast, and which is unfortunate.
Yeah.
I do believe, though I'm a optimist at heart, so I do think that overall the net it will be good for most.
Yeah, I mean, there's always growing pains, which is what the the people are going on strike for, and what there'll be definitely be some legal cases at some point. There's probably some already in play, and figuring all that stuff out as things go, and um, it's going to be messy in getting there, but they'll figure it out, and it's how progress happens sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's easy to be doom and gloom about this, and I obviously think that there's some real concerns here, but going back to like the copyright and privacy laws, even let's say that they do catch up and are able to to be enforced, and saying that you can't take um, previously copyrighted works and train your models off of them if you don't own them. Well, that um, then could create demand for high quality data that isn't previously copyrighted. And so that could mean that um, entities spring up that are creating synthetic data to be used in other people's models. Like you mentioned, um, Shutterstock earlier, like I think they're finding kind of a business opportunity here in providing training data, because they've got all these images and what, like Getty images. So
Mhm.
it's like you can see, oh no, image generation is going to completely annihilate our business because people can just make images. Well, these models have to be trained on something, and we've got the data, so how do we monetize that? And so there are opportunities that spring up out of here. You just have to be aware and keep your eyes open to see where those opportunities are.
Yeah.
For sure.
That brings up an interesting kind of topic that was kind of happening in the chat back and forth. I've noticed this is a little off from the Siggraph talk, but it's still kind of AI and machine learning generative relevant. I've heard that we're starting to run into kind of a garbage in, garbage out issue where models are scraping as much data as they possibly can, and more of the data that's being scraped is generative stuff. And does that ruin the model? Does that make it bad? Is feeding generated data back into a LLM make for bad generations? Like, and how do you keep that from happening?
Yeah, it certainly can be. I think it's kind of like a yes and no type thing, because synthetic data isn't necessarily a bad thing, in my opinion, but it's very easy to get it wrong, I think, is the problem.
Mm.
That if you're taking literally anything, then some of that is going to be garbage. And the more of it that is generated in a certain way, like from a particular LLM, let's say Chat GPT. I think the term is GPT slop is a term that gets thrown around a lot, where it just kind of sounds the same way. It uses the same vocabulary. It has the same idioms that it falls back into. The more of that that gets into your training set, the more that's going to affect your final outcome. So, um, variety is key, like variety and quality, um, and that's extremely hard to manage on these enormous data sets. I mean, we're talking about trillions of tokens of text that are going into these things. I mean, are you gonna just read through it all and proofread it? And it's a huge challenge, and there's a lot of people that are involved in that. But on the flip side, like if you can get that high quality synthetic data in there, just because it's synthetic doesn't mean it's bad or is going to ruin your model.
Sounds to me like there's still place for humans involved then, because it sounds like the only way to know that the data is good is human verified data.
Yeah, and there's and like Dr. Kinghorn, he's a big proponent of the Microsoft Phi models, specifically because they're focused on using only the highest quality data, like from textbooks and scientific papers and all very, very well reviewed stuff going into that model, just for that exact reason, to make sure that the data set is as high quality as possible, to make sure you don't have this garbage in, garbage out problem. But there's only it on the flip side of that, it only it limits the size of your training data, so you can only have so much going into that. But if you've got a smaller model that can produce better outputs than a larger model, then you'll save time on training and inference and money and energy, and so it can work out. There's a lot of different strategies, and everybody's really trying everything from the smallest models all the way up to the huge hundreds of billion parameter models, and just it's all still shaking out. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah. So as we're kind of toward the end here, I got a vague feeling from Siggraph that a lot of at least on the image video generative side of things, that it still feels like I mentioned this at the booth, a solution looking for a problem. Because it seems still so weird and janky, and it's not quite there, and it needs so much touch up and stuff that it's not very helpful right now. Do you get this similar feeling?
Yeah, from the sessions I went to and people I talked to, image generation was a little bit more used. Sometimes it's used as extremely rough concepting, storyboarding, that kind of stuff, just to like get something onto the screen. But not many people are using it for like all of their concepting or all of their image generation. Some people might use it to create icons or logos or something like that, but nothing really big, because there's not a lot of fine-tuned control that you can have, fine-grained control you can have over the generation or the editing or anything like that. A lot of times you just have to like generate it, be like, oh, this is good. Maybe it's good enough to use for whatever. Send that to an actual artist who will then clean it up or make a completely new drawing or whatever. But it just feels like it's kind of a nice starting point, but not the finished product. Video is even worse, because now you have the temporal problem where like image to image to image back to back, they start to like get wild, and you'll see some AI generated videos that are pretty humorous because it just goes off the rails.
Yeah.
And then 3D is a huge problem, because current models just output this bundled up, like if you look at the actual geometry, it's just looks like a plate of spaghetti. There's just stuff everywhere. The textures aren't aligned very good. It's really not usable for anything other than maybe like, I'm going to throw some basic 3D things in the background just to block out a shot or something like that. But it's not, you're then going to have to remake those models from scratch anyways. So yeah, and that's where there's a few solutions in the works that are going a completely different way than the traditional just build from ground up. We have Sloyd, which is an interesting name, Sloyd. This is a startup. It's available as a standalone web app or as a plugin for 3ds Max Maya Blender, where it functions like you would use a normal LLM. You type in what you want it to create, and it will generate a 3D model. The difference is, instead of completely generating a 3D model from scratch, it goes to a library of pre-designed pieces that are all parameterized, meaning that, like, if I have a cube or a window, I have, like, this is how it can stretch and how, like, it has all these parameters built into that model as well.
Okay.
So if I say I want a building, it goes and grabs windows and walls and doors and stuff, and then, like, puts that all together, makes a good model that you could use. The problem is that you're limited to those pieces that have already been created. And if you want to do something beyond what that is available in that library, it doesn't, like, you can't just be like, oh, I want to make an alien building, because there's no alien building parts for it to pull from.
Okay.
It's also all cloud-based at the moment, so you're relying on sending all your data over the cloud, which some studios might not like. And you can't train your own. You can't add your own stuff to the library for it to then train off of and generate from. So it's limited there.
Although that does make for an interesting starting point, because if you have like something like Unreal, who has a tremendous marketplace of all kinds of crazy stuff, like then if they come out with some of their own tool or something, then
the Unreal one, though, that then gets back into ethics, because the marketplace is created by users. So and it's a paid marketplace. So if you're training off someone's paid information without paying them, like, that'd be really bad. And who else was? There's some use cases for these models in a professional workflow, but it's not the, like, solution that a lot of people think, or that a lot of the hype is saying it is.
That's good.
Unfortunately, a lot of CEOs and upper people are buying into that hype and changing production schedules and headcounts and all that kind of stuff based off of it, and it's not getting the results they want.
Oops.
Yeah, and that kind of goes back to the automation versus augmentation argument. And I think that the generative AI side of things is, I don't know, it's probably cooler, more interesting, more exciting, but it's also more difficult to actually implement, certainly in a professional pipeline, versus really, I think, where a lot of the tools are, at least right now, it's like using machine learning to help with these repetitive tasks that you'd have to do. And like the new AI tools that are coming out in like the non-linear editors like DaVinci and Premiere and all of that, and like letting you automatically mask things and that kind of stuff, just to reduce the amount of time you spend on these repetitive tasks, so that you can focus on the creative part rather than expecting to click create video for me and it just generates something. I mean, maybe we'll get to a point where generative AI is going to have, I'm sure it's going to have a bigger role, year after year. But really, it's the tools that help improve productivity is where we're at right now. Those have the biggest impact, in my opinion, versus the generative stuff, which is oddly enough what gets talked about more.
Yeah, there is in animation, there is some good stuff for coming out for, like, facial animation, because that's one of the most difficult tasks in animation, is animating a human face to make it look right, because animations are a little bit off. It just becomes this uncanny valley thing. The problem is that your face has hundreds of muscles. I can't remember how many are in your face that are all used when you're communicating. how your skin hangs on your face, how fat is deposited underneath that skin. Everyone's a little different. All that works in combination with your movements to make a face animate. And to do that manually is a lot of work. You have to put in all these different control points, and then you weight them so that, like, as this moves up, then this does this thing, and all these things different things happen. And I get excited about this. So it becomes very difficult. But then now they're putting in tools where you take that model, do the control points that the animator wants, you apply a machine learning to it, and it will then basically take care of the rest of the animation. So, like, I just need to animate the mouth movement, how that particular person purses their lips when they do something, when do they raise their eyebrows, does it wrinkle or whatever, and it will take care of everything else to make the animation better without spending just ungodly amount of time setting it up, trying to run simulations and like physics simulations of how things move. And they would actually like model out every muscle and fat cell and everything to like make it do everything. And now you can just use a machine learning to kind of speed up that process. Like, that's great. That's something that everyone wants to use. They don't want to be like, make this person say whatever, and it just makes a person and starts talking, you know?
Yeah. And I like that angle. I like that. I think that's the way it should be. The augmentation part, I think, is good. But that does bring us a little over our time for this discussion. Is there anything else you guys want to mention or talk about before we go?
I think that covered most of the things. I mean, we didn't talk about Jensen or Zuckerberg's speech, but that was covered in news cycles pretty well.
Yeah. Well, cool and awesome, man. So thank you guys for joining me today. This is really cool. I'm as the audience surrogate and the sort of the semi-layman in a lot of these talks. It's always fascinating for me to hear more detail from the people who are very much in the trenches of it. So I always appreciate when you guys take time to talk about this stuff. So thank you very much. And as always, I want to thank the audience for being here and asking good questions and having a great conversation in the chat back and forth. You guys, wonderful. Thank you very much. We're going to do this every first Tuesday of the month. Next Tuesday, tentatively, we're going to be talking about the new AMD 9000 Ryzen 9000 CPU stuff. We should be having some articles coming out about that soon, PM. There's been some stuff surrounding that. So stay tuned for the articles. And then September the 1st, right? First Tuesday of September, we'll have the whole crew here, and we'll be going over all that stuff as well. So tune in for that. And thanks again.
Cool. Thanks, everybody.
See you next time. Bye.